Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, Matt Wells from the Big D. He's been flexing all morning because of the Cowboys stomping of the Minnesota Vikings. Mike Bond, a bona fide superstar in MMA media. He's up in Toronto, Canada. And, of course, Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. The guy's banked over 3,300 shows. Catch the podcast, MMA Junkie Radio, Mondays and Thursdays. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. He's our producer. Let's get started. All right. Well, two big names were chirping at each other recently. Did you guys see that? Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal. It all started with Dorino tweeting at Gamebred and laying out a timeline of fights that Masvidal's turned down. Quote, just letting everybody know that at UFC offered at Gamebred Fighter 3 times. First time was for November 12th. That would have been UFC 281 that just took place. And then he continues. He said that he needs more time. Second time for December 10th. That's the upcoming UFC 282 card here in Las Vegas. He continues. He said he was going to fight me, and now he just said no again. So I guess the B from his BMF doesn't stand for bad. I wonder what that could stand for. All right. Masvidal responded with a fiery video. I can't put it all out there, but I selected a few quotes that matter. He says, Hunter, which is one of the executives there at the UFC, Hunter, when you hear this or see this, can you please tell this bitch I never agreed to November, December, or January? If you want to get your ass whooped when Leon Edwards defends his fucking belt in England, I would gladly beat the shit out of you, Gilbert. I guess I'm all in on the bad words at this point. One last thing. Burns also talked about moving forward and pivoting towards Bilal Muhammad. All right, I know that's a lot to take in, but I ask you guys, is Masvidal Burns still the fight to make? Matt, get us started.
Personally, no, it never was for me. I mean, it just doesn't make sense from a ranking standpoint, and I know rankings are what they are at this point in the UFC. You know, lexicon of things. It's just like they're pretty numbers next to names. They don't necessarily mean all that much, but I mean, listen, you have a matchup that's perfect right there in number 4, number 5, if you're going by the official rankings of the UFC, and that's Bilal Muhammad and Gilbert Burns. Jorge Masvidal falls way down that list at number 11, again, on the UFC official rankings. So if those things are to mean anything, why would you pass up that matchup that's right there for the taking? That's a much more intriguing matchup stylistically, competitively for me. Because personally, I think if you put Jorge Masvidal and Gilbert Burns in the same cage together, I think we know what's going to happen, and I think Gilbert Burns is just going to impose his will in the grappling department. And we all know that's where Jorge Masvidal struggles. So for me, I'm out on that matchup. Give me something that makes more sense. And plus, we don't know when the hell Masvidal is actually going to be able to compete, you know, from a legal standpoint either. So I'm out on that matchup.
All right, but Matt, you did say the word intriguing, and I think a lot of people would push back and go, man, Masvidal and Burns have heat. That's pretty intriguing, isn't it?
I mean, it's an aspect of it, but again, like when they actually get in there, you know, and actually compete, I think skill for skill, I think Gilbert has just all those areas that Masvidal is lacking in, and I just don't think it'll actually be all that competitive. Sure, the trash talk is fun, but like again, when you lock the cage door, I think we all know what would happen.
All right. Goes, you happen to be walking through the UFC offices, and Hunter pulls you aside and goes, I don't know what to do. Goes, what would you tell him?
I tell him, don't order me a 3-piece and a soda, man. I'm scared of Jorge Masvidal when he gets in this mode. I'm with Matt. I love rankings. I hope they mean something, but lately they just kind of haven't. Masvidal's video kind of sold me, guys. Like, when it comes to Jorge Masvidal, it's like when you throw all that stuff out the window, records, all that. I don't know how some of these fighters are able to do that, but he's kind of one of them, right? You pull Street Jesus's card out, there's going to be trouble. And this is a fight that, yeah, you know, it probably would affect a guy like Bilal Muhammad. Bilal, he's done a good job of being vocal, but I don't know that he's been able to win people over. But yeah, if it were up to me, I would make that fight. I like Gilbert Burns and I like Bilal Muhammad, but I don't think it's going to happen, guys. I think this video, I think the heat, you think about what happens with how this fight could maybe springboard one of these two guys back into the mix. Think about Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards, right? Kamaru Usman was winning that fight until the very end. What does that remind you of, guys? What if this rematch goes down the same way and it's almost like Pereira and Israel Adesanya? That would open things up magically, right? And we know they love to put Jorge Masvidal in these big fights. He sells big pay-per-views. So it would open doors for a lot of fighters. Once you get the heat going, I'm all for it. Does it make sense? Probably not. But I'll tell you what, putting it on the same card does make sense. I kind of like that for insurance. Just keep them not in different hotels, keep them in different cities because we don't need a doubleheader that night.
All right. And are we wasting our time here? Michael Joel says in the chat, Masvidal's passing through a lot mentally right now with the court cases and other stuff. He's not ready to fight mentally right now, so I don't even think the matchup will happen soon. How about you, Mike Bond? What do you think of it overall and Michael's comment here?
Yeah, I don't know in response to the comment, like if he's mentally not ready to fight. I think from everything I've heard, he's been in the gym pretty consistently. I talked to Mike Brown in Abu Dhabi back in October, and he said he's been training really, really hard and he's ready to get back in there. But I do wonder how that legal situation with the Colby Covington alleged attack, all that stuff, how it does play into his timeline to return, to leave the country, to go fight in Brazil. I'm not really sure what the status of a lot of these things are right now. So it would be nice to get some answers on kind of Jorge Masvidal's availability overall, just in general. As far as the fight, though, itself, if you're Gilbert Burns, of course you want this, right? Like you're chopping at the bit. It's a huge name. It gets you back in title contention, puts you right there in a way to rebound from the fight against Khamzat. So I understand why Gilbert Burns would want this very, very badly and probably feeling like he can win for all the reasons the other guys just explained there. If you're Jorge Masvidal, it's definitely a risk, right? Like he is on the 3 losses in a row, but he wants to get back in there. He wants to fight for the belt again. He has that Leon Edwards fight just sitting there for him if Leon can beat Usman, but he needs to win. No one wants him to get a title shot on a 3-loss streak. He doesn't deserve it. He's already had undeserved title shots before. So he wins this fight, and I think we could actually, have a legitimate claim to getting there. It is just a risk, right? Like obviously Burns is very capable of beating him. It's a bad style matchup, but as we saw with Burns and Khamzat, he can be lulled into kind of a crazy war there. Maybe he, digs deep and, pulls his junk out and says, hey, like, let's throw down in the middle of the cage here for 3 rounds, 5 rounds, whatever it may be. And then maybe I think Jorge does have a good chance of landing, finishing the fight. So it is a winnable fight, but it's definitely a risk. So I understand kind of all sides of this, why Jorge would be interested in doing it, why Gilbert badly wants it. And I can see why the UFC wants it too. It's a great fight.
Yeah. All right. Well, if my vote counts at all, I think Goes nailed it in the sense that after Masvidal's video, I was getting pumped up. And I like that insurance angle too.
What makes more sense for Masvidal if not this, though, right? We saw Michael Chandler yesterday on ESPN saying he wants to fight Masvidal next. Does that make more sense? Does he wait for Conor, just hoping that fight maybe does happen like next summer or something? I can't really look here and say a fight screams at me in the face is making more sense than this.
Yeah, and they're all risky. All the fighters that we've named so far, they're all tough matchups. Regardless if it's Masvidal or someone else, they're all pretty well-rounded fighters. So I think the risk is pretty high with either one of them. So you might as well just shoot big, aim big.
Leon Edwards did media too, man. He says it's on site, whether it's in the octagon or on the streets. So I like your strategy, Goes. If UFC security is listening, put him in another city, a neighboring suburb, but not in Birmingham or Cardiff or London, wherever this is going down. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Uncle Chael had an interesting take about the Diamond, Dustin Poirier. Here's what he said. Dustin Poirier right now is not on a mission to be a champion, and to become champion is very realistic. That's not the statement I'm making. Sonnen continues, Dustin Poirier's number one goal is to not reclaim his championship. He wants to go into a category. It's the elite of the elite. It's a category so high that when you start training, you don't even set a goal to do. He goes on to talk about sold out arenas, main events, and wins and losses not mattering as much because the goal he's shooting for is Conor McGregor status. All right, you guys with the American Gangster on this one? Goes, take it away.
Look, I agree with this to a certain extent. I think Dustin wants to be champ, but I don't think it's his priority. I think Dustin's of that generation of fighter that has tasted some of these bigger paychecks, but at the same time spent most of his career fighting for the smaller paychecks. And I think he's making up for a little bit of lost time. Time's going to start to be running out soon. So I would agree with some of that. I think that could be some of Dustin's mindset. But to make that happen, you got to get down and be dirty, right? Some of the names that Chael Sonnen brought up: Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz. These are people that he mentioned in that video. What's that one intangible that they all have, right? They get nasty in the cage, but they also get nasty leading up to the fight, right? And I don't know that that's something that Dustin Poirier has, or it's something that he wants to do. It's that heat that they create that really makes us forget about their records or how they got to this point. It makes you want to watch the fight because they're running their mouths a lot. There's a lot on the line in that regard. So I don't know that Dustin Poirier can do that. I'm not saying he can't do it. I just think that road to that position would probably be a little bit longer. So I don't think Chael's really wrong here.
All right. What about you, Mike Bond? You know Dustin pretty well. You've covered him for a bit. You think that Chael Sonnen's onto something?
I think there's maybe slivers of truth in what he's saying, but the overall sentiment I don't really agree with. I mean, if you talk to Dustin enough, you hear him kind of say like the only remaining goal for him in his MMA career right now is to be the undisputed champion. He got a piece of it with that interim belt, but he still really wants that. And I think everything he does, every fight he takes is ultimately building towards that. I know you could say, hey, look, like he took the third Conor fight over a title shot, against Oliveira or Chandler, or whatever they wanted to do when Khabib vacated the belt. But that was a very unique circumstance, right? Like you have a Conor McGregor trilogy fight where you're going to get a cut of the pay-per-view buys sitting right in front of you. Even Dana White himself said he thought that was, one of the smartest moves he's seen a fighter take before. So it's kind of hard to hate on him for that one. But as far as where he goes from here, I think it all just kind of ties into each other. If Dustin wants to get to that title shot again against potentially the Makhachev versus Volkanovski winner, or if Dariush slides in there, he knows that he's going to have to take certain fights to get there. And with where he's at in his UFC career, most knockouts in lightweight history, 21 wins, it's all going to be big fights. We're not going to see Dustin fight an unranked lightweight or someone who's ranked 12 or something like that. Like Chandler at 5 going into the last fight is probably the lowest it's going to get, right? Like looking at the logical matchups at lightweight, it should be him versus Beneil Dariush, right? Like that's the fight that makes sense. Is that some Conor McGregor, star status money fight? No, it's the most logical fight based off the rankings and merit, and the one that's going to be the title eliminator. So I think it's a balance for Dustin. He's very open about the fact that he wants things that are going to, get the butterflies in his stomach, that's going to make it easy to get up and train. But I think that comes with just the level of the sport that he's at, pretty much any matchup he gets. So I don't necessarily agree that he's chasing Conor McGregor status, whatever that really means. There's no such thing as Conor McGregor status in our sport. No one is going to be Conor McGregor or have his level of pull. He is one of a kind, once in a lifetime. So it doesn't really make sense to me, the whole sentiment of it.
Yeah, and he's already 2-1 against Conor McGregor. I mean, going 3-1, will that make a difference? I don't know. McGregor is just a unicorn, like they say. I do want to ask you something, Mike. You brought something up about that third fight. Why'd he take the third fight? Dana White called it a brilliant move. Wouldn't the brilliant move have been to go for the title, and if you won, then fight McGregor for the third time, but get a bigger cut of the pay-per-views? I'm sure as champion, you get a bigger cut of the pay-per-views than whatever pay-per-views you've negotiated as a non-champ.
Potentially. Would have to see the exact language of the UFC contracts and what Dustin negotiated, but I know going in to that second fight, before they even booked it in Abu Dhabi, there was a trilogy fight clause in there, and part of the agreement was that Dustin did not get pay-per-view for that second fight with Conor in Abu Dhabi, but if he won, there would be a third fight and he would get a cut of the pay-per-view. So I believe that he was paid probably like similar to what he would have been going in there as the champion, right? And to your hypothetical there, we saw what happened when Dustin fought Oliveira. So this scenario we're creating, what if he went in there and fought Oliveira and lost? Then what happens with the third Conor fight? So he had to take a calculated risk there, and I think he played it correctly.
However, I think the fight that was offered was him versus Chandler, and he felt like Chandler hadn't earned his stripes.
I don't think it was officially offered. I think they first wanted to do the Oliveira fight, and then when Dustin said no, that's when they called Chandler to be the other half of that fight.
There you go. That's why I call this guy a titan in MMA. All right, how about you, Matt? What do you think about all this, man? You with Chael on this or no?
No, it's an interesting comparison, right? Because why would you be chasing the status of a guy you beat twice? But when I heard that quote, it's more like I think he meant he's chasing the money and he's chasing that aspect of the game, which I couldn't agree more with that. Like, what else are you fighting for? Like some people say, yeah, like I'm fighting to win, I'm fighting to be champion and all that. Dustin's tasted a part of that gold before. So at this point, you're 33, you got 36 fights under your belt. you should be trying to cash out as much as possible at this point, because your career is not going to be lasting too much longer, I don't think, at least at the highest level of the game, so to speak, right? Because he is right there in that title conversation still. I wouldn't be upset if they do a Poirier-Makhachev matchup at this point. Why not? Let's go ahead and do it. But I think he is all about those exciting fights, all about those fights that are going to be the quote-unquote money fight. He's going to be that guy that everyone looks for maximum excitement. He's going to go out there and stand in the pocket and trade. I mean, the Chandler fight lived up to everything that we all expected and possibly exceeded those expectations. I know it did for me personally, but I mean, he's that guy that's just going to be hovering around that top. So while you're there, you need to be cashing out. You got the hot sauce cooking. The stuff is amazing. I don't know if you guys have tried it, but I have, and it is it lives up to the building. I'll just say that much. But while you're at the top, cash out, man. So whatever matchup that is that you feel is a winnable fight that you're going to make the most money out of, do that. And if that's a title fight next, hold out for that and start banging that drum. So I'm all aboard the quote unquote Conor McGregor status, because the way I interpret it as that guy that's going to cash out, have millions of dollars in the bank, and just have this status that I was just a little bit better than everybody else at one point in my career.
Mm-hmm. All right, the compliments are flowing in. Let me give a shout out.
What are we even talking about there, right? Like, to Matt's point, like, if Chael's whole framing of this is that he's chasing money, I don't think that's any secret. Like, Dustin Poirier is kind of the epitome of a prize fighter. He talks about constantly how the whole reason he does this is to support his wife and daughter. Mm-hmm. So, like, I mean, kind of clearly, like, obviously, if we're just talking about he's in this for the money, he's fighting for money. Well, yeah, obviously.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. But it's like, some point, like, sometimes, we get lost in that because some fighters say, I don't care about the money. And it's like, of course you do.
And they're lying.
Yeah, exactly. They're lying because they want to portray this image of like, oh, I'm here to be the best in the world, blah, blah, blah. Money doesn't matter. I'll fight for free. Like, no, you won't. Stop lying. You want money. You want to have zeros in your bank account. So please let's stop lying about that.
The chat room was showering you guys with praise. Todd Johnson says, great show today, brothers. Andrew Gray says, one of my favorite channels. Sky Vizen L Daddy says, one of my favorite shows now. Thanks, fellas. However, a little overtime on this question. I think this goes back to Mike Bond. Me, Diamond 44 says, Dustin, he says, does Dustin really view Dariush as a big fight, though?
I don't think he does. I think it's one of those ones that we talked about, kind of earlier. Like, does it give him the butterflies in his stomach, all that stuff? But I think he understands the game well enough that he would be willing to take that fight if it was like, hey, the title is going to be next. You win this one. He understands the bridge and what leads to what. But obviously, if it was like, hey, you can do a fourth Conor fight and get a title shot with a win, or you can fight Dariush and get a title shot. I mean, I think the answer is pretty clear what you would do in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like, who really does see Beneil Dariush as a big fight? And whose fault is that, right? Like, the promotion doesn't really put anything behind him. They just kind of brush him under the rug. So there really is no way to make that into a big fight.
Yeah,
if the UFC doesn't want to recognize it, then how are we supposed to recognize it?
That's Beneil's fault, honestly, in my opinion.
He goes out there and he's won 7 in a row, and he says, hey, I'll win 10 more in a row if it takes to get me a title shot. That's not the way you're supposed to play it.
Yeah, that's not the way it's supposed to go, especially when he said, I'm not going to beg for it. Like, no, you're not supposed to beg for it. You've earned it. Now just say you've earned it. Get on the mic and say that's my fight.
But would you not agree that there's highlights out there, there's things you can show of this kid that show that he deserves to be a good fighter, for people to talk about? I don't think the UFC does enough to really show any of that.
No, I think you guys are right. And I mean, even talking to Beneil at the press conference after that fight, I asked him, I said, I know you say you don't want to beg, but where's the line between begging and asking for what you think you've earned and deserved?
Perfect.
He kind of said, if 7 wins in a row doesn't do it. It was a very political kind of answer. He didn't really give you much, but yeah, he needs to be out there beating the drum. He should be, tweeting and doing interviews saying, Dustin Poirier, you're ranked above me. You think, you deserve a title shot. I'm the guy who deserves it. I'm going to show it. I'm going to beat you. Like, there's things Beneil Dariush could and should be doing to get some, clout around his fights and get some excitement here.
Yeah, well, it definitely worked when he asked Elon Musk to send the right Tesla. So maybe go back to that, right? Not necessarily begging, but insisting. But we got to move on to the third one here, guys. All right, the last Emperor has announced his last fight. Don't make plans for February 4th, 2023, as Fedor Emelianenko will challenge Bellator heavyweight champion Ryan Bader for his title. On that same card, Bellator light heavyweight champion Vadim Nemkov will also defend his title versus Yoel Romero. That's quite the 1-2 punch at the top of this historic card. React to that. Mike, the floor is yours.
Well, I guess first and foremost, huge for Bellator, right? To get back or on CBS, first time for them there. That's something they, I think, have desperately needed. Just something that kind of injects some life into that company. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about at a later date, kind of what Bellator's 2022 has looked like as a whole. But this is a great first move to kind of roll into the next year. And as far as the fights, mixed feelings, I would say at the least, about this being Fedor's retirement fight. I think he's going to be a pretty heavy underdog. I think it was 35 seconds where he was knocked out by Ryan Bader in the first fight, and he's only got older and more battle worn and a long layoff going into this. So there's a lot of kind of ticks against him, but at least respect to him. This is a scenario I kind of created in my mind like over a year ago and asked Scott Coker about it last December and said, hey, like, at the time, we were looking at a Bader versus Moldavsky fight. And of course, Moldavsky is, Fedor's one of his pupils from there. And it's like, hey, if Bader beats this guy, maybe we do like a Fedor final fight going for the belt. I mean, if Fedor wins this, like, it's going to be one of the most legendary things, right? To retire as the heavyweight champion, get that Bellator belt, which he's failed to get before. Like, what a storybook ending. It literally doesn't get better than this. But as we've seen time and time again, in mixed martial arts and combat sports, the perfect fairy tale end rarely exists. And more or less, usually we're left sad at the end of these types of fights. Look at what just happened with Frankie Edgar a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, this is obviously going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be a special moment in MMA history or just, sad feelings all around for Fedor's exit from the sport. And, I think Yoel Romero versus Vadim Nemkov is a compelling fight too. I think Nemkov's the clear favorite there. He showed a lot of great improvements against Corey Anderson there. And I think if he can parlay those over to Yoel Romero, who I think he has even more of a little bit of a stylistic advantage over, that gives him a real opportunity to shine. And then, with that spotlight of CBS, I think Nemkov could potentially be kind of one of the bigger faces of Bellator coming out of this event.
Thank you for bringing up CBS. I should have included that. That's tremendous that they're going to be back on CBS. It's a huge stage, huge platform for Bellator. And then yes, I think without specifically saying it, we've tipped off anybody who hasn't seen or hasn't heard the result. Vadim Nemkov is your Bellator light heavyweight Grand Prix champ. He defended his belt against Corey Anderson. So that's why he moves on versus Yoel Romero. Matt, before I turn it over to you, how about this? Both challengers are going to be 46 and 45 respectively in the main event and co-main event, but they are big names, Fedor and the Soldier of God.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Mike kind of touched on. It's going to be potentially one of those things where we send another legend out on the shield, and we're all sad after this is all said and done. I think it's a bad matchup for Fedor at this point, because Ryan Bader is still very much at the top of his game at this point. And I mean, listen, you look at Fedor's last couple of losses. I mean, who are they against? They were against guys that really came in there to knock his head off. And that was Ryan Bader. And that was Matt Mitrione at that point, who went in there and just swung for the fences. And then all of his other wins recently have been against, the older guard or the guys that we don't necessarily think we're at the same level anymore. So I don't like this matchup because I do get the Frankie Edgar vibes. Like Mike said, man, I don't want to see it happen. Yeah, like we all love Fedor. He is a legend of the sport. One of the best, one of the biggest what ifs in the history of MMA. What would have happened if he went to the UFC? We'll never have that answer. Hopefully, this is just another one of those things where, we're going to sit here on the edge of our seats. Hopefully, we don't see him end up on the wrong side of the highlight reel. And that's not to say that I don't want to see Ryan Bader win this, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, we all know the worst possible outcome, and I think we all kind of expect that as a real possibility here.
Yeah, that would definitely crush me, man, if Fedor went out, in a bad way. Goes, how about you, man? Are you pumped up about this? I think you said the other day or yesterday that you may actually be going to LA for this one.
Well, I'm a huge Fedor fan. I grew up watching Fedor, but I'm not really a huge fan of this fight. I mean, do you guys remember when Fedor lost to Verdum, Silva, and Henderson? What were we saying back then? We were saying this is not the Fedor of old. He may need to retire. Father Time might have caught up to him. That was 11 years ago, you guys. 11 years ago we were saying these things. He's 46 now. look, man, I would have liked to see him maybe get like an aging veteran, somebody kind of in the same boat as him. I understand why they did the Bader fight, but I'm with Matt. I think this probably isn't going to go his way, and that's going to really make me a sad guy. But I will encourage people, if you haven't seen Fedor fight live, you have to do it at some point, and this is probably your last chance. So the energy that's in that crowd, the flags that are waving, the song, his stoic look as he's walking out, it's something you really do want to see in person. So I'm going to do my best to probably get out there. As far as Yoel Romero, or Danny's listening, Joel Romero, he needs to change his name to YOLO Romero, because he's got to put that caution to the wind, man. Let them hands go. Make people get excited for when this guy fights again. Because I used to be really excited when this guy would fight. And, just lately, it just doesn't seem to be there anymore. So I want to see him really make a statement here. But when you put him on the same card as Fedor, I think you got me. I think I'll be there.
Because if you're referencing that Davis fight, he thought it was going to be 5 rounds, so he was just about to get going, and then all of a sudden they shut it down.
And lastly, maybe we're not giving Fedor enough credit here. I mean, Ryan Bader is 40 in June. He's been knocked out in a fight more recently than Fedor has, in the first fight against Nemkov. He is obviously at the tail end, obviously still a champion right now, but I think there's holes here. I mean, he's not like the fastest guy in the world anymore. He's been stopped. These are heavyweights. They're going to be throwing big punches. What happened in the first fight to Fedor could happen to Bader in the second fight. I do think there is a little more flexibility there. And maybe he does find a path to victory and, pull one last miracle punch out of the bag.
Well, we'll see. I think I'm going to be there as well. I know, Mike, you come into a lot of the SoCal events, so we'll all find out together. Should be a good one. Bellator 290, February 4th. And before we turn the page to topic 4, a shout out to Usman Nurmagomedov, who defeated Patricky Pitbull Frady on the Bellator 288 card. He looked phenomenal. So shout out to him. Now we got to move on here to topic 4. MMA media member Aaron Bronstetter had an interesting tweet a few days ago. He says, quote, "If you had to bet your house on a current Bellator champion beating a current UFC champion, who would you pick?" So I don't have to do much more other than to say, Matt, it's back on you.
I'm going to throw a disclaimer here. I'm not confident in any of these champions beating a UFC champion right now. But if I had to make a pick, if you're forcing me to place my money on the table, the value of my house, that is, specifically to the question, right? I will go with the current light heavyweight champion, Vadim Nemkov. And I think that's really tailed off of what we just saw him do in the cage this past weekend. He looked vastly improved. He showed that he can shore up those holes that, Corey Anderson kind of exposed in that first matchup. He looked really good, man. He looked like a guy that was tough to figure out. He was sharp with his striking. Takedown defense was on 100. So I think that that would be the most competitive fight for me, would be in the light heavyweight division if you put him against Yuri Prohaska, especially, let's say, if it ends up being Glover that wins that rematch there. I like that matchup even more, I think. But, yeah, again, with going back to that disclaimer, not very confident in that. But just for the argument's sake, that's my choice.
All right, Goes. How about you, man? Who do you like in this one?
I'm Googling U-Haul rates as it stands right now, guys. This is kind of grim, but look, if I had to do it, I'd probably take a chance on Johnny Eblen, just because if you look at the equivalent in the UFC, what's his big hole, right? Alex Pereira, his hole is wrestling, and that's where Johnny Eblen is a superstar, right? The thing is, he doesn't have very much experience, but then again, it is Pereira, right? So if I'm going to take a stab at it, I'd probably do that. The problem with this question, man, is like where Bellator succeeds and accelerates is kind of, those are the same strengths in the UFC. So you're talking about some of their best superstars there. It's really, really tough, man. But I guess if I had to pick one, it's Johnny Eblen, and I just hope that guy, I just feel like can be a future star for them. I think he's still improving, so I would do that. But yeah, I probably got boxes out here in the living room, guys.
Guys, aren't you being a little harsh? I mean, the Strike Force guys, a few of them came over and won titles, guys and gal. WEC, a lot of times they were regarded as the JV 155-pound division, and Cowboy, Pettis, Benson, the last two won titles. Cowboy was a superstar in the UFC. Bellator sent a few cats over, and they've done well as well. So I don't know, Mike. What do you think? Are these guys not as confident? Are they putting the for sale sign too early?
Yeah, I think so, honestly. I was going to say Johnny Eblin before Goes so rudely jacked my pick there, but I think he's probably got a pretty good path to victory there. But I also like the welterweight champion. I think Yaroslav Amosov is extremely talented, and I think he would be
Yeah.
a very interesting matchup with Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman, whoever wins that trilogy fight. Especially Leon Edwards, though. I mean, we saw what happened in that Kamaru Usman rematch before he landed, the head kick heard around the world in the 5th round. I think he was losing at a lot of the elements where Amosov is very strong at. He comes from an amazing team, as does Eblin at American Top Team. They come with, the best trained fighters, the best game plans, and I think they would have a shot in either of those fights at minimum. I mean, I don't think they would be 50-45 blowouts, even if they did go the way of the UFC champions. So I like to think those fights would be more competitive, but I think the 3 weight classes we've touched on here, welterweight, middleweight, and light heavyweight, are the ones where this is a real conversation. Pretty much every other division, I think the UFC has it pretty comfortably in the bag there. But with these 3 divisions, I think we're all talking about, similar stuff with Nemkov's style, with Eblin's style, with Amosov's style, and it largely centers around their ability to out-grapple their opponents. And I think that's what it would come down to. And in fights like that, I think, all those guys have a shot.
I'll make it up to you, Mike. I'll do you a favor. When this is all over, you can move into the guest room right here, okay? When you miss your house.
As long as it's not sharing a wall with George there, I'm good.
Oh, the snoring. He's heard about the snoring. All right, I got it. But listen, if the captain's watching, Eric Albarracin, he's going to say, what about my boy Pitbull? He's won 2 titles in 2 different weight classes. He's beaten notable names. He's defended the 2 titles across the 3 different reigns like 7 or 8 times. Are we dismissing him too quick against Volkanovski, who has been on fire? I'm not high or nothing. I'm sober here as I do the show.
I would say no, because we're talking about a guy in Alexander Volkanovski who's about to challenge for his 2nd title, who has soundly defeated arguably one of the greatest featherweights of all time in Max Holloway multiple times. So no, that one didn't even come into my mind as a question. Like, yes, when you're looking at the Bellator champions across the board, you point to Patricio as one of their best, but that's in the worst division possible when you compare it to the UFC.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Someone in the comments said there, maybe Chris Cyborg, give her respect. Obviously, we've seen the Amanda Nunes fight, but a lot has changed since then. I do think, in fairness to Me Diamond 44, that would be a competitive fight in there as well. And I'd like to see that rematch between Amanda Nunes and Cyborg for sure. But I could see it ending the same way, honestly.
Yeah, and I didn't even bring it up because I think technically right now Cyborg's in that free agent stage, right, Mike?
True. Yeah.
Just on a technicality, I didn't see her as someone.
And UFC barely has a featherweight division, so what are we even talking about here?
This is true. There's more people on this panel than in the UFC's featherweight division. All right. How about this one? One more. AJ McKee. Had he not lost to Pitbull with that undefeated record, the #1 ranking that he had at the USA Today Sports and MMA Junkie rankings, and also prior to Volkanovski having the awesome 2021 that he did, I don't know. I think a lot of us would be like thinking that one over, right? I mean, he looked pretty untouchable until this Pitbull fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as Pitbull. Like, you can make a case for it, but you just don't feel that great going into it, especially now with the change in that weight class as the champion. Maybe the previous one, I might give him a better shot, but here, it's going to be difficult.
All right. We'll move on. Good stuff, guys. Thank you to Aaron Bronstetter for that one. You made us play around with it for a while, and we had some good answers, I think. All right. Topic 5. Here we go. Dillon Danis, this guy, huh? Noted submission grappler. We got to give him that. 2-0 as an MMA fighter. He's undefeated. That O has not gone yet. Definitely one of the top shit stirrers in combat sports. Last week, him and his crew ran into Nate Diaz. I'm sure you guys saw that. UFC 281, one of the guys in his crew took a Stockton slap for his effort, chirping. And this week in Austin at a boxing event, the day before the boxing event, I should say, Danis mixed it up with YouTuber / boxer KSI. And then I guess a short time later, MMA fighter and boxer Anthony Taylor, they went at it as well. He got a good punch in on Danis. So just that alone has me asking what happened to Dillon Danis, but not in the sense of like, where is he? I just explained where he is. What's with this, like, I don't know, this tailspin of a career, right? I gotta add though, before I turn it over to you guys, since all this, since we started thinking of the question, he is signed to box KSI January 14th in London. Discuss. Goes.
All right, man. Look, when you look at it, boxing has Jake Paul running amok, right? We have Dillon Danis running amok over here. I can't blame him for what he's doing because that recipe is there. Win, lose, or draw. It's probably going to pay off for him. But is there any longevity in this move? I don't think so. You want that paycheck to last. You want it to keep going. And Dillon's not really known for his striking. Now, KSI, he's not really like a Muay Thai expert or anything. They're a boxing champion. But he can throw hands, and he's done it before. So the matchup doesn't really make much sense for Dillon Danis's brand. I don't know that this is the right move, but then again, I can't really tell you what is the right move. I mean, really, when you put it in perspective, he should be fighting Oscar Willis. Oscar Willis's record's almost the same as Dillon Danis's, right? Like they have probably the same amount of experience here at this point. So I don't know, man. Like I couldn't tell you what his next move should be, but I feel like this definitely isn't the right one. And I don't even know if this will make it to the fight, guys.
Yeah, well, it's coming around. And yeah, nice shout out to Oscar Willis, 1-0 in amateur MMA. Good job, mate. Next up, here's Mike.
Yeah. I mean, this seemed like maybe something Dillon's been chasing for a while, right? Like if you look at his social media over the past couple of years, he's been trying to angle for Jake Paul. He's been trying to angle for KSI. I don't know if maybe he feels boxing is the more appropriate venue for him right now. I don't know the condition of that knee. And I think that has a lot to do with why we've kept seeing him away from competition for so long. I think he, hurt it, had surgery, re-injured it, all that stuff. Maybe he just doesn't feel comfortable trying to go through a full mixed martial arts training camp and then into a fight where he's going to be having to grapple aggressively with someone. So he's like, hey, if I'm going to compete, I assume he's getting a pretty good payday for this. I mean, like whatever the case may be, some of these guys in these crossover fights seem to be getting paid pretty well. So he was like, hey, if I'm going to put my eggs into a basket right now and come back to something, maybe he feels there's the most risk reward ratio here for him. I'm not super keen on all this stuff. Like I have tuned Dillon Danis out a long time ago as far as like the social media antics and the saying that you'll fight everyone every time and, offering money to your Twitter followers and never coming through. There's just so many off-putting things when it comes to him. But when this rolls around, will I watch? I mean, probably. I'm guessing we'll be covering it in some sort of fashion. So I guess they made the right move there. But like this, it's just kind of another thing. I don't think it really means anything. There's no impact. If Dillon Danis gets clowned or knocked out, he's going to be, the fodder of memesters for years to come. So maybe if you don't like him, you can kind of look at that as the upside to this.
It's got to be the payday because he should not be boxing. If anything in the grappling world would have made more sense. But anyway, what do you think, Matt? You don't seem too excited about this either.
I mean, it's appropriate that he ends up on a card with the name Misfits in the title, right? So it's like it's a perfect fit. Like much like Mike, it's just like I was tuned out to what Danis was doing, like his antics or whatever. They got old pretty quickly when it was pretty apparent that he wasn't trying to get back in the cage and, prove all of the stuff that he was talking. So whether that be, just injuries or whatever the case, I mean, it's fine. Like fighting is not an easy thing. So, if you're not comfortable to get in there and actually go in there and compete, if you're worried about injuries or whatever have you, if you feel you can't compete against those guys, that's fine. Just stop talking like you were talking, because at that point, it just doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, whatever, like, sure, we'll watch. It's going to be a spectacle. It's going to be one of those things where, people are going to be intrigued to see what happens because it is Dillon Danis, and he is this guy that's kind of doing like the Nate Diaz thing right now, where he's just showing up and trying to slap people outside of events. So let's see if he gets put in his place when he's actually inside of a ring for a sanctioned fight.
It doesn't seem to be going good. I forgot about the time that the bouncer choked him. I named the other two incidents. The bouncer choked him as well. So he has to review that game, stepping up to someone on the streets. It's a whole different ballgame. He doesn't seem to have that one going. All right. Me Diamond also says all that time Danis spent around Conor McGregor has gone to his head. Yeah, pretty much. That's it. All right, we have time for the additionals, the additional questions here now that our 5 topics are done. Guys, you guys have seen the prices, right? Right? Well,
Mhm.
it's time for some PFL discussion. We got their finals coming up on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Is the price right? They want $49.99. Mike, what do you think?
Man, I'm kind of torn on this one. I guess so, just because I don't think it really makes a difference. I mean, everything I've heard talking to people in like the pay-per-view industry is it doesn't really matter, when you're putting on a product like this. If you're going to charge $39.99, $59.99, $49.99, the people who are going to buy it are going to buy it. If we assume it's going to do 10K buys based on this card, those 10K people are going to buy it, whether it's $10 more or $10 less, in my opinion, and from everything I've heard from kind of the experts in this industry. So in that sense, I think it's fine. I mean, we discussed this months ago when they first announced the move to the pay-per-view. I think we all unanimously agreed that it wasn't the smart move, but we don't know what their financial situation looks like, how much they need, the money back. They're giving away 7 $1 million prizes, coming up on Friday or Saturday, whenever the show is. And yeah, I mean, for them, I guess they need to recoup a sliver of that money somehow. So for me, I guess the price is right, but the whole thing is wrong.
Goes, they got your fitty?
Well, yeah, they're probably going to get me at the end of the day. But I mean, look, they have the right to do a pay-per-view, but the price I think is a little steep, especially considering the holiday season. That's where my budget tends to tighten up a little bit. I got a lot going on. I mean, if you look at the price of the UFC, you're not going to go that high, but you're not going to go as low as like BKFC, right? So you got to find something kind of in the middle. And the fact that they lost Marias and Shane Burgos kind of hurt a little bit too. That was a fight that I really wanted to see. So, dude, just I think the timing is just terrible. But if you're gonna pick like the right price, you could probably get me easily at $20. I spend $20 on stupid things all the time, so I would definitely do it. I think they're good matchups, man. It's just I think it's really bad timing.
All right. How about you, Matt? Is it unanimous? Are you in?
I mean, I'm in because, obviously we cover the sport very closely, right? But my biggest thing here is you're advertising an event, your championship event, to take place on Black Friday. You're actually putting Black Friday in your tweets out there and everything like that, and you're advertising a price of $49.99. I hope someone is savvy enough over there at PFL to recognize that, hey, since we're advertising this is taking place on Black Friday, why are we not going to have a Black Friday sale? I mean, at midnight Eastern, there should be an email in everybody's inbox saying, hey, Black Friday price on this pay-per-view. We're going to bump it down to $29.99 right now or something like that. Why would you not? Like, that's easy marketing. That's like right there. And I think you would just get those people that are kind of on the fence to really dive in and take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that should be, a strategy of theirs going into this. And I to Goz's point, I think it's a good card. But the hard sell here is that you got 6 championship fights. So you're looking at 6 fights, 25 minutes each, potentially. That's a very long card. And we all know how PFL's pacing goes too. But I mean, I'm going to watch, of course. I mean, I'm intrigued to see what some of these fights bring, especially that main event with Kayla Harrison and Larissa Pacheco. Pacheco's been steamrolling everybody this year. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention or not, the guys in the chat, but go watch what Pacheco's been doing to these girls this year. Like it's kind of scary. She's been on a whole different level, and if she can touch Kayla Harrison like that this time around, and I know they've fought a bunch of times before, and we've all seen that outcome before, but this time it feels a little different. So, I mean, I'm interested. I'm in. $49.99 is a little steep, so hit that Black Friday sale for us. Why don't you?
Yeah. And there's supposedly this big competition in another sport that's been going on that only happens every 4 years. I don't know what country you guys were born in. I can't tell right now, but it's kind of a big deal as well.
Yeah, for sure. Iran, though, they may want to take back today's game. They got blasted by England 4-0 last I checked. You're right. The Black Friday marketing is right there for the taking. It's not too late, even if it's 24 hours. If people just want to get a W, and if it means like, yes, I got in and saved $5, $10, $20, they'll do it. Hopefully PFL's paying attention. And Draven Huckleberry says not gonna pay to watch PFL. So he's taking his stance. We got to move on though. All right. This one's a little bit of a different topic, different tone here of seriousness. The UFC betting investigation, things have gotten a little sticky. This past weekend, the NSAC, that's the Nevada State Athletic Commission, They would not let James Krause corner Miles Johns. This stems from the UFC's betting integrity partner, Don Best Sports, investigating some gambling activity stemming from the Derek Minner Shaylon Nurdenbecky fight. So that was a few weeks ago. Now, a few weeks ago, the UFC did put out a statement that included this quote: "At this time, we have no reason to believe that either of the athletes involved in the bout or anyone associated with their teams behaved in an unethical or irresponsible manner." So we kind of thought that everybody was going to move on from it, especially after the UFC said that. There appeared to be some late betting as we got closer to the fight. That's, I guess, what is the cause of all this. All right. What do we make of all this? Matt, you're leading off.
I think it's an example of, and I know we don't know all of the details of everything that's going on here, but I think it's just an example of, James Krause flying too close to the sun. When he went on the MMA Hour and he was talking about all of the betting and how much money he was making and all this stuff, all the while you're cornering a lot of these fighters. You have a lot of inside information that other people don't have access to. Even people inside the gym, like, they won't have access to against, like, with their own teammates, because you're the coach, you're the guy at the top of the building there. So what's going on more so than a lot of people, and you're talking about betting at a very high level, making more money. I think one of the quotes was that he's making more money than he did from fighting by betting on fights. So you go out there and you put that stuff in a public venue like that with a very large platform, and you're essentially kind of bragging about it. It's going to raise some red flags, and it's also not a good look when one of your fighters goes out there and you have suspicious betting activity going on. It's just not a good look all around. And I mean, like, when this news dropped that he was suspended, from Miles Johns' corner, I mean, we just got the news that the main event for that night was taken off, like, maybe 5 minutes prior. And, like, all of a sudden it's like you got two big news things right there. Or was it 5 minutes after? I don't remember. But either way, you have two very big news items that dropped right there, and, like, oh, the main event fell out. Oh, wait, a coach was pulled from betting. That's the more bigger story here. So, like, we got to figure out what's really going on here. And hopefully it's just one of those things that we can clear up, because it is a real black eye for the sport. If you do have a coach that is involved in, I don't want to say fight fixing, because that's a very egregious allegation. And hopefully that's not the case. Whatever comes out in this investigation, hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it was just one of those things where it's like, we see fighters go into the cage hurt all the time. And, Derek Minner was one of those guys that needed to fight. We see it all the time. Fighters fight because they need paychecks, and they take another fight because they need another paycheck. Are they 100%? No. We hear them talk about coming into fights with pre-existing injuries all the time. We hear examples of fighters taking fights so they can get that insurance to pay for an injury that they had. It's a dirty game sometimes. But man, there's a lot that could be going on here, and hopefully it all comes out in the investigation. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully it's not one of those things to where we're looking at fight fixing allegations.
Goes, how about you?
Well, it's winter time, guys, and much like Uggs on women, this is not a good look for the UFC, for MMA, for gambling. When you think about some of the advertising that we see, a lot of people put money on these fights, and to not be able to trust that outcome, we've seen what's happened in other sports when these type of things come up. It can ruin it, dude. So you don't want a story like this anywhere near you, and I expect things to start coming down on people, and it's a rough situation to be in. I will tell you this, though: if you gamble on fights, sometimes even when you do get information like this sport is so unpredictable that it almost doesn't help. There's fighters that go in there with torn ACLs, broken hands, I don't know, broken bones. They still win from time to time. So really, if you're gonna make a bet and you have any feeling of anything like this, just stay away from the play altogether. But this is just not a good look for the sport, and I expect things to start really coming down hard on this, because, like I said, in other sports, it's made things very, very difficult.
All right. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful with how we talk about this, just because it's obviously still ongoing. ESPN gambling reporter David Payne Purdom has kind of done some good reporting on this so far. The thing that kind of really struck me, as Matt kind of referenced, the thing about him being pulled from the corner was like, okay, And then David puts out that, the New Jersey gambling board, whatever it's called, has stopped taking bets on anything related to James Krause or his fighters or coach or associations. And that seems like a really, really big red flag, and like that the walls are kind of starting to close in on maybe something pretty serious here. So I don't want to make any big allegations or claims if he's done this or this, but from everything he said, as Matt laid out very nicely there, during his answer, there seems like there's something at least that needs to be looked into going on here. And I'm glad it's being done. If it turns out that it is like the worst of what we're kind of talking about here, that's going to be a huge black eye on the sport. This is going to be one of the biggest stories of the year in recent times, and how it affects James Krause, his ability to coach that camp as a whole. Obviously, Brandon Moreno's got a huge title fight coming up in January, among other people. So there is a lot of potential repercussions and fallout to this. And it seems obviously that James Krause is in the middle of the spotlight on it. And I think we just kind of need to wait and see what further information comes out and what ultimately ends up happening here, because there's a lot of potential tentacles that go off this to other areas of the sport.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff, guys. I'm a guy that tries to see all the positives and always think the best of everybody, as covering someone like James Krause for a long time. Definitely all this is surprising, but it is, again, allegation stage, speculation. There's an investigation that's going on right now. I think it might be timing with that interview that he did do, where he said, hey, look, I do well on the gambling side, along with the fact that all of these gambling sites are pushing fighters and coaches to give their picks. And I think what James realized is, hey, I'm pretty good at these breakdowns. So I don't know if all that bled over, and like you guys perfectly stated, there's injuries going into every fight. I don't know. Hopefully it was just the lining of the planets, and this wasn't anything where the worst outcome, might come out of it. So we'll see. Well, at least we touched on the topic, and I think you guys did it in a very professional way. And as we get more details, obviously we'll cover it. We got just a couple minutes, so you guys need to be real quick here. Goes came up with this one. The World Cup just started. So what we want to know is, if MMA fighters played soccer as well as they fought, which country would be favored to win the World Cup? Goes, lead off. This is your baby.
I think Brazil's had a little bit of a resurgence, guys. They kind of went away for a little bit. I think I might be Team Brazil here.
All right. How about you, Mike? Who do you think?
Russia, I'm guessing. We've seen the dominance. I feel like that one's kind of a layup. I mean, we have multiple champions, various organizations. I feel like they're repping it strong and probably have the brightest future to come as well.
Yeah. How about you, Matt?
I'm taking France just because of Cyril Gane. You put him on the pitch, it'll be nasty. And especially if I can claim Francis Ngannou too. Oh, yeah. Let's see it.
Yeah. Manon Fiorot just texted me. She goes, hey, what about me? How about New Zealand? New Zealand, if they were to walk in there, they got some gangsters over there as well. I would feel a lot better if this was the Rugby World Cup, but it's the Soccer World Cup. But I still think they'd have a decent showing. All right. Good stuff from everybody all the way around. Kenny, of course, nailing it with the B-roll as well. So thank you to everybody that chimed in on the chat room. Shout out to Daniel Cormier and Eddie Alvarez. I saw you guys. And, of course, we got you covered every week here at MMA Junkie. We got a fabulous app, free on all tablets and smartphones. We got the YouTube channel, the Instagram. Go out there and follow it, because these guys do an excellent job of covering the sport. And if you miss any of it, we'll be back to recap it every week here on Spinning Back Clique Live, Mondays, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We'll see you in about a week. Go Team USA in that World Cup.